What is a defilement, fetter? By Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. In Buddhism, originally the mind is pure, however when the mind starts to contact with stimuli from the world, then the mind starts to be in trouble. These problems within the mind processing starts with a minor problem first, and then it is aggravated into more serious problem during the process of dependent origination. One of the most important Buddhist strategy is to bring the mind back to the original stage of purification by abandoning and eliminating all the arising defilements or fetters from the mind. Therefore, it is necessity to study on what is a defilement. What is the origin of the defilement? What is the harm of defilement? And how to abandon and to eliminate the arising defilement, respectively. In this learning process, the more we study on the mind and experiencing with varieties of defilements, the more we can understand the causes of all problems in the world, and then gaining knowledge on how to resolve the problems. It is clearly that the mind processing will determine on what kinds of actions we will take in responding to the world. At this point we can conclude that if the mind is processing into a right direction, then we will take a right action, called a wholesomeness action to the world. On the contrary, if the mind is processing into a wrong direction in contradiction to what the truths, and then as a result, we will eventually take an action with greed, hatred, and delusion, so called an unwholesomeness action to the world. What is right or wrong, and wholesome or unwholesome depending on how the mind is processing. And how the mind is processing also depends on certain condition that causes an effect on the associated state of mind. The defilement is not an evil or bad luck caused by a demon, but it is internally caused inside the mind. What kind of action we take to the world is basically due to how a mind is working in the right direction or not. The Buddha explains on the dependent originations of mind processing step by step as follows.
Thus, in dependence upon feeling there is craving. In dependence upon craving there is pursuit. In dependence upon pursuit there is gain. In dependence upon gain there is decision making. In dependence upon decision making there is desire and lust. In dependence upon desire and lust there is attachment. In dependence upon attachment there is possessiveness. In dependence upon possessiveness there is niggardliness. In dependence upon niggardliness there is defensiveness. And because of defensiveness, various evil unwholesome things originate. The taking up of clubs and weapons, conflicts, quarrels, and disputes, insults, slander, and falsehood.
In Buddhism, by having an insight observation on the mind processing step by step, then we can investigate on where about the problem begins at. This is a very important concept in solving the problem in life. The typical problem within the mind is considered as an error or a contaminant occurring within the mind processing. It can be compared like a contaminant of defilement that internally messes up with the mind during the mind processing. And by understanding on how the mind is processing, then we can identify that the root cause or the origin of all problems in the world is simply the defilement that arises within the mind. Therefore, if we can fix the arising problem within the mind, then we can resolve all kinds of problems in the world. This is the reason why the goal of Buddhism is to cleanse all the arising defilements including greed, hatred, and delusion within the mind, that is, to purify or to liberate the mind from any wrongdoing by taking a right action in responding to the world at all times. In Buddhism, since there is no self to govern an individual life, and there is no any super self to govern the world in nature as well, therefore there is a question, what makes all kinds of problems and suffers in the world? The answer is that all kinds of problems in the world are caused by unwholesome actions, and an unwholesome action is caused by an associated contaminated mind, starting with a minor error within a mind during receiving stimulus from the world through 6 sense bases. The defilement is considered as a most serious problem in life, and the goal of Buddhism is simply to eliminate all arising defilements within the mind processing. All kinds of actions taken, good or bad, depend on what the mind instructs to do so. Therefore, it is very essential to study on how does the mind function, and what is the origin of the problem in the mind. In Buddhism, the defilement is sort of a mental problem caused during a mind processing. A defilement is defined as kind of mental error that contaminated the mind and then misleading the mind with ignorance into a misunderstanding the world, and finally taking a wrong action in responding to the world and thus causing suffering in life. In Buddhism, all the problems in the world are not caused by any demons, but it is the problem of an individual which misunderstand the world with ignorance. Therefore, a study on the mind to gain a knowledge of the process of dependent origination reveals the origin of the contaminant of defilement within the mind processing. The goal of Buddhism is to eliminate all arising defilements within the mind, and since the mind is no self, therefore the only way to resolve the problem is by studying the truths of how the mind functions in nature, and then guiding the mind with the right knowledge of what really the truths of life are. The knowledge of the truths of life within nature will be used to eliminate defilements, and then the mind will be liberated from any attachments of mental errors of all kinds of defilements within the mind. Principally at the moment of interacting with the world, if we can bring in knowledge of wisdom to cope with and to avoid the origin of defilements, however, if in case a finest defilement is avoidably created, then using insight wisdom to liberate the clinging of any subject of consciousness with defilement away. And the Buddha called this technique the Noble Eightfold Path to abandon any arising defilements within the mind processing by wisdom at craving, at clinging, and at ignorance in the process of dependent origination. The defilement is the most serious problem that causes all suffers in the world. However, the defilement is created within an individual mind by an ignorance of not knowing the truths of life within nature. Therefore, the only way to resolve this problem is by studying the truths to gain wisdom to completely eliminate all arising defilement within the mind, and this is the way to bring peace to the world.